If you think you understand why somebody just did something, you're almost certainly wrong. You almost really have no clue how they wound up being who they are in that moment.
Welcome to the Brain Fit Podcast, where we share the cutting-edge science on how you can improve your memory and live a happier, healthier life.
My name's Robert Love. I'm a neuroscientist, and I have a medical clinic in Florida where we are reversing Alzheimer's in our patients. Today, I interviewed Dr. Robert Sapolsky, professor of neurobiology and neurosurgery, so brain surgery, at Stanford University. He has spent 33 years studying baboons in the wild, and he's also been a tremendously powerful communicator and writer. He's a three-time New York Times bestselling author, and he's a fantastic communicator and a great storyteller. In this interview, we talk about stress. We talk about free will, which is really, really interesting. We talk about raising healthy children, and it is just a fantastic episode. Oh, and he also is an expert in the hippocampus, the memory center of your brain. So we talk about the hippocampus and neurogenesis, how you can grow new brain cells. So if you want to know how you can grow new brain cells and improve your brain health, you're going to love this episode. So here is Dr. Robert Sapolsky. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, welcome to the Brain Fit Podcast. Thank you so much. It is such an honor to have you.
Well, glad to be on. Thank you for the invitation.
And so not only are you a wonderful scientist, you're a professor of neurobiology and you're a professor of neurosurgery, interestingly enough, but you're also a master communicator. You've written multiple best-selling books that really speak to regular humans. Just the average person who's interested in science just loves reading your work, and you're just a master storyteller. I'd wonder if you would start us off with one of your stories.
Well, thanks. This concerns one of the most interesting examples of aggression I've ever seen. You know, human aggression, we're just like every other primate out there. We hit people over the head with heavy things. We have territorial displays. We're crude, we're heavy-handed, and then we could do aggression like no other species on Earth. And this is something that occurred, an aggressive incident that involved my wife. This is when our kids were little. We were driving on the freeway one night in our minivan, and some total jerk cuts us off in traffic, like really like on the edge of causing an accident. And my wife slams on the horn at him, and the guy's window goes down, and he flips us off. And this guy is just outrageous. And my wife sort of ruminates for a second and then says, I'm going to follow this guy. I'm saying, honey, do you think this is, and the guy is being followed by us. And you could see it took about a mile for him to realize he was being followed by us, and he takes some exit, and my wife follows him, and he gets into this mall that we know, and we're sort of following him through the maze of it, and he comes to this light, a red light, where there's a car in front of him, and we happen to know this light was a long-lasting one, so he's trapped in there, and my wife suddenly says, okay, I'm gonna go give this guy hell. And she grabs something from the divider, and I sort of once again do this.
This is the car. She grabs something and you don't see it.
I don't see what it is. I say, honey, do you think this is a good? And she's already out of the car. And I see she like storms up to the car, and a guy rolls down the window, and she's gesticulating at him, and she suddenly flings something into the car. And she comes storming back, and she looks just triumphant. And the light changes, and if it's possible for a car to slink away embarrassedly, this guy's car does that. It makes like 2 right turns and disappears into the night. And I say, okay, honey, what did you throw in there? And she finally says, a grape lollipop. I said, if you could do something this rotten to another human, you need this. Flinging it. It was like the most wonderful passive aggression I've ever seen. I couldn't believe how wonderful she was. Yeah, human aggression involves like flinging a lollipop at somebody under the right circumstances.
What was happening in that person's brain and hormones when, it went from something that looked very confrontative? He cut you off, you chased him, which is really threatening, especially if you're in a place where, there's a lot of guns like Texas. We chase someone in Texas that might go south. And to get out of the car, that's kind of an aggressive act, knocking on the window. Oh my gosh, this could be a serious form of regret. What was happening in that person's neurology?
I would assume his amygdala was going like crazy. It was probably all sorts of conflictual stuff when seeing this was not a 6'4" beefy, jerky guy, but my wife instead. So that was probably making things complicated. And then he probably had a quarter second of sheer panic, wondering if she was about to fling a knife at him or if this was, and instead sees this lollipop land, which makes no sense to him. And then she says, if you could be such a rotten human, you need this, where this is making no sense to him. And then I would assume about 10 seconds went by and said, whoa, I have been dissed like never in my life. This was a master. And he realizes all he wants to do is like slink home from there.
So he drove home with his tail between his legs.
Absolutely.
It's actually in your class at Stanford. I watched your class virtually on YouTube. That I learned that the tail between the legs in the dog is meant to hide kind of the pheromones coming from them during embarrassment. They're trying to hide that by bringing their tail between their legs. So that's they're actually trying to hide their embarrassment with the tail,
which is great because it speaks to like a fundamental difference between human communication and other species. Oh my God, other species, such complicated things, bird songs, they learn new ones each season. There's dialects, chimps, vocal communication, such cool. But what they can't do is lie. Humans have evolved this amazing ability to lie, to dissociate their message from the messenger so that they can communicate something very duplicitous without giving it away. They could be poker faced, but other species can't do this. So you got a dog, and along comes some big, scary, terrifying big dog that's threatening little Fido there. And what he does is he's scared. And what's part of dog biology is he starts releasing fear pheromones from his butt, from his anal glands. He can't control it. This is just biology. The pheromones are made of stress hormone breakdown products. He can't say, oh my God, don't release those. I don't want to let this guy know I'm scared of him. He can't lie. He's communicating that he's totally intimidated. So what does he do? If he can't change the message, at least he muffles it. He sticks his tail between his legs to try to put a lid on those glands there.
Kind of like if we're laughing at inappropriate time, we might cover our mouths to try to not let the laughter.
Exactly.
I think it was in that lecture you also talked. Was it cat pee used for perfumes to increase attraction? And it was like something about pregnant cats. Did I get that right?
Yeah, back when I was much younger. There was this perfume, Chanel No. 5. Actually, does it still exist? I have absolutely no idea.
I think there's a song about it, isn't there? I mean,
I know I've missed the boat on all aspects of it, but it was considered very flashy. And it somehow came out that one of the main ingredients was from the sweat glands of stressed Abyssinian male cats. First off, what the hell is that about? Again, pheromones. In this case, male cats, some sort of sex pheromone thing that for some reason smelled absolutely wild to humans. And if I recall, this produced all sorts of animal protests. But whoa, what's musk? When people are putting musk on, it's from a muskox. We're using pheromonal signals.
If you or someone you love has Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, I want you to know there is hope. Alzheimer's is preventable and it is even reversible. In fact, we are reversing Alzheimer's in my medical clinic here in Florida. My partner and medical director is Dr. Josh Hellman, a medical doctor trained at Harvard who specializes in preventing and reversing Alzheimer's disease, and we are reversing Alzheimer's in our patients. If you'd like to learn more about working with us to both prevent Alzheimer's and even reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with other forms of dementia, we would love to hear from you and send you some free information so you can learn what we are doing and see if it's a fit for you to come down and work with us in our clinic. We also work with other clinics around the country to help patients both prevent Alzheimer's as well as to reverse Alzheimer's and reverse memory loss associated with dementia. So if you'd like to learn more, go to brainpowerclinics.com. Go to brainpowerclinics.com and then enter your information. We will send you some free information, and then we hope to work with you, if we can be helpful to you, to help you prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease. And it was counter to what we expected. I think it was the male cats, the women would put that on, and that would drive men, that get them sexually excited or get them interested, which is kind of the opposite of what you would think would happen.
Which was totally weird, because one of the themes is, in terms of pheromones, airborne odorants that communicate stuff, is sexual pheromones where the recipient is the same sex as the one giving off the pheromones. It tends to inhibit their reproductive physiology. Competitive stuff, whereas if it's being perceived by somebody of the opposite sex, it tends to stimulate stuff. Rodents and hamsters and male smells make females ovulate and stuff. So here suddenly you got this weird thing of like females putting on male pheromones from cats. And that's supposed to smell appealing to males. Why are men buying this? And the answer is, men don't buy most perfume, women buy most perfume. That turned out to be the punchline to that one.
So, Dr. Sapolsky, you've written a number of best-selling books on the New York Times list. Your newest one is Determined, The Science of Life Without Free Will. So you're now writing as a scientist that we don't have free will, or certainly we don't have as much free will as we once thought. What do you mean by that?
Well, and I should preface it with saying that virtually like 90% of people on Earth, including the philosophers, including the theologians, including like virtually every person who wrote a damn book review of my book, strenuously disagrees, and goes for what is sort of a modern compromised view about free will, which is we got free will. Some people have much less than other people, babies, demented elderly people, somebody with brain damage. There's times that all of us have less free will than normal, when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're drunk, whatever. But that's within a basic backdrop of we have free will. We could be agents. And I think this is nonsense. And I think when you look at the science closely, we don't have a shred of free will. And the trouble is, people get suckered into thinking they have free will by this intuition in moments where they make a choice. You know, we make choices all the time. Do you want to have coffee or tea? Do you want to invade this country or not? We make choices.
You chose to do this interview, just to interject. You chose to do this interview. My team was pestering your team for, I think, months until we finally were able to harness you. So someone in your line chose to be here, and I'm so grateful to whoever that person was, you and whoever else does your calendar.
Well, good. I just do what they say, but I'm delighted to be here. So you pick between coffee and tea, and you're conscious that you're about to make this decision. You're pretty sure that if you tell the barista coffee, you're going to get coffee rather than get punched in the nose or get handed a Camel or something. So you're pretty sure of the outcome. And most of all, you don't have to ask. Nobody's got a gun to your head. You have alternatives. And for most people, that moment, you're conscious that you're choosing, you're confident about the outcome. You could do something different from that. Just intuitively feels so much like you are the captain of your ship at that point. So that's enough. There's free will. And I should add, the criminal justice system in the United States pretty much accepts that as free will. Were you conscious of your acts? Were you aware of what the outcome would be? Did you know you had alternatives available to you? That's it. Lock the guy away in the slammer. And for me, that's totally irrelevant. That moment where you're choosing coffee over tea is completely irrelevant because you're missing 99% of what's going on, which is, how did you become the sort of person who would be standing there at that moment choosing coffee? How did you become someone who would have money in your pocket to buy coffee, would like coffee in the first place, would have time off from work, would have work? You're in a country where there is coffee. You're in a country where you're not homeless. So how did you wind up being the person you are in that moment? And when you look at the nuts and bolts of it, all it is the outcome of biology that you had no control over, and its interactions with environment that you had no control over. Like choosing coffee over tea is like the last 30 seconds of a movie and trying to decide what you think of the movie from that.
If you are having trouble sleeping, I have a great supplement I want you to know about. It's called Roar Lion's Mane. So lion's mane has many different benefits for the brain and for the body. Lion's mane improves memory. Lion's mane reduces stress, reduces anxiety. It helps slow down aging by lowering inflammation, and it helps with sleep. It helps you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and fall back to sleep. I learned about lion's mane about 5 years ago when I was having trouble sleeping. When I took it, after about a week, I noticed that I was sleeping better and I was able to fall back to sleep, and I was having vivid dreams, which is really cool. And now I take lion's mane 5 to 6 nights a week. And I do this because it helps me fall back to sleep. So when I wake up, I'm no longer anxious when I wake up, and I'm able to kind of lay still in bed and fall back to sleep. And I get vivid dreams, which I really like, and it improves my REM sleep. So if you'd like to try some of my Roar Lion's Mane risk-free, go to roarlionsmane.com or robertlove.net to learn more. That's so interesting. So I underlined that phrase in your book here on page 88. You're quoting from philosopher Robert Kane from the University of Texas. How did you get to be the kind of person you are now? Right. So you're saying instead of free will being the choice that we make right now, it's actually it's everything that led up to that. Every choice that we're making right now is the very end of the movie that's been our life so far.
Exactly. And when you sort of break those pieces down, so what went on when you asked for coffee? What went on a second ago? Your neurons. What went on 10 seconds ago? The coffee smelled good. What went on 4 hours ago? The levels of this or that hormone you secreted. What went on in the previous months? Your brain expanded this region, contracted this other one because of your experience, neuroplasticity. What went on when you were an adolescent, when you were a kid, when you were a fetus? Since fetal environment turns out to be shaping in all sorts of ways, including like what diseases you're going to have when you're 60 years old. And then, of course, genes. And then the most bizarre thing, like what sort of culture were your ancestors inventing, 4 centuries ago? Parentheses, what kind of ecosystem they were living in, because that shapes what cultures come up with. Why is that important? Because a minute after birth, your mother was mothering you in a way that was already reflecting that culture passed on over the generation. Your mother was mothering you in a way so that your brain was being constructed at that time in this way instead of that way. Why do you order coffee from 1 second ago, just centuries ago? All of that put together is the stuff you had no control over.
So I want to ask you, what do we do with this? I think the reason you're getting reviews saying we don't like this is because humans don't like the idea that they don't have control. If you sat me down and said, listen, you actually have no control over your life, I would very quickly want to get out of that conversation because I like the idea that I have control. You've mentioned, how the perception of control reduces stress, and that's actually healthy. And when we have no control, and the research to show that loud noises we don't control are very stressful to us. But if we control them, if I do the nails on the chalkboard, it hurts me a lot less than it hurts you because you don't have control over it. But I got a great coffee or tea joke. This is from Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
And so someone comes in here and he's in his office. Someone comes in and brings him his morning drink. He takes a sip and he says, "Excuse me, if this is tea, please bring me coffee. And if this is coffee, please bring me tea."
You get the sense like if he wasn't suicidally depressed most of the time, he would have been a fun guy to hang out with. He was very witty and cynical.
My goodness. And boy, he had a lot on his plate. He might have done some really great infrastructure building in the U.S. if you weren't trying to just hold us together. By the way, I just recently went to Disney World, and so they have the animatronic Lincoln, and Walt Disney was huge into that. He loved that technology, and that he's now speaking the whole Gettysburg Address. He does a lot more than he did before. They recently amped that part up. So with your with your thesis that we have a lot less free will than we think, because really I'm just an accumulation of biology and experiences and learning that I frankly didn't control, and the decisions I'm making now are already predetermined by what's already in here in my body, my neurology, and my environment. What can we do with that? What can we do as human beings to live happier, healthier lives if that's true?
Well, this is where paradoxically, I think the good news comes in. Because if you really, really, really truly decide there's no such thing as free will, it never makes any sense to blame anyone or punish anyone or to praise anyone or to reward them. It never makes any sense for some human to feel more entitled than some other human, to feel as if they earned something, as if they deserved something. None of those things make sense. And probably most importantly, if you really don't believe there's free will, hating someone makes as little sense as hating a virus or hating an earthquake, because we're just biological machines. And if you do that, if you really take that to an extreme, you got to be really careful before you judge someone, especially harshly, because you almost certainly don't know how they wound up being the person who they are. If you've got someone who, just because they've got a salary the size of like Africa as a CEO, who thinks that there's God's gift, that there is some moral worth to their success, that makes no sense at all. They didn't deserve it. They didn't earn it. None of these things. And what you wind up seeing is, yeah, you got to protect society from dangerous people. But the notion that you are, accomplishing something just when you punish someone makes no sense at all. Yes, you got to make sure, like, the person taking out your brain tumor tomorrow is competent and thus meritocracies. But there's no basis for thinking that person is a more morally worthy human than you are, because they're good at doing that, or they're good at making money, or they're a good lawyer, or they're a good actor, but that none of us are more deserving than any other one of us. And if
I
you
try to
really,
keep that in mind when I see unhealthy people. So if you look at footage from the beach, people going to the beach in the 60s, everybody's healthy, everybody's thin. And if you watch today, most people are overweight or obese. I think it's 7.5 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 people in the United States are overweight or obese. Really terrifying. And in my early 20s, when I was trying to be fit and healthy, like I am now, I've been blessed to be fit and healthy for most of my life. I would have judgment about them. I'd say, look, these people are lazy, right? That's what we default to. That person's lazy. They're not willing to do the work, and maybe they have less willpower. Maybe they're lazier. Maybe they're lazier than I am. But in reality, if I were that person, I would probably be the exact same way. If I were born into that person's shoes and I were raised in that environment, I ate the food they ate as a child and developed the taste that they did as a child, developed the bad gut bacteria that they did from eating McDonald's all the time, I would probably be 35 or 40, however old they are, and look exactly as they did if I had the same situation, the same genetics as they did.
exactly. And if they instead have been brought up in, I don't know, a stable upper middle class home with loving parents who read books to them at night, and if they got an interest in some musical instrument or ice skating or something, off they'd go and have lessons, and their parents would appear at every performance and cheer them, and they'd probably be a student in my classroom in Stanford. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of control over all those ways in which you turned out to be who you are. You got some weirdo variant of some gene in your hypothalamus for this receptor for this hormone leptin, and your brain has trouble telling when you're full. You don't get satiation signals. You have some weird micro architectural screw up in one part of your cortex, and you flip letters over in your eyes. B's and P's look the same, and you have trouble learning to read. You got dyslexia. And when I was a kid, the diagnosis would have been absolutely clear. This kid is like stupid and unmotivated and lazy. And as we've learned more and more about these things, oh, I had no idea biology had something to do with this. Biology is all of this. And it's a much better world that we don't burn people at the stake when they have epileptic seizures. It's a much better world that we teach kids with dyslexia that they have dyslexia rather than that they're lazy, or that we teach people who are on the autism spectrum that they're not cold, unfriendly people who are unlikable and they wind up hating themselves, but they got trouble processing social cues because there's some weird thing in their brain that is responsible. All of us are the outcomes of those things.
Interesting. Dyslexics are actually more likely to be entrepreneurs. Than
Interesting.
But if you ask them, would you want your children? So, and they interviewed successful entrepreneurs who are dyslexic, and they said, would you want your child to have dyslexia? And they said, absolutely not. They
Absolutely
said,
not.
no. They're entrepreneurs because they're problem solvers. They figured out how to do life with dyslexia, and they figured out how to do business and how to solve problems. Then they became very successful. And they said, no, I don't want my child going through this. This is just awful.
Yeah, they probably had the fire to be the successful entrepreneur because they had a list of people they wanted to take revenge on for how they were treated, how they felt back when. I'm going to show them. I'm going to control some multinational that's bigger than like all of Western Europe. Yeah.
So number one takeaway is, so be careful how you judge someone. Consider. So is that the right framework? Is we should really be compassionate with other people and consider, if I were them, I would probably do the same thing, because they are the sum of their experiences and genetics, which they largely did not control. Is that the big idea?
Yeah, except my taking it to the complete, like, lunatic extreme of them having no control at all, and genetics and early environment and hormones and all that. Yeah, I think maybe the best way to summarize this is if you think you understand why somebody just did something, you're almost certainly wrong. You almost really have no clue how they wound up being who they are in that moment.
Boy, the whole field of social psychology then is kind of out of place, because their whole thing is, can I predict behavior by manipulating these things, right? We think people behave a certain way because of XYZ factors. So you said at one point, I made a terrible mistake. I think you said I wasted my life studying the hippocampus. I should have been studying the prefrontal cortex. So I'm a big fan of the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain. My specialty is Alzheimer's prevention and reversal. That's what we're doing in our clinic in Florida. So I love the hippocampus, and so I'm so interested in this. So I'd love to talk with you about the hippocampus and how this changes over the course of our lives.
Well, hippocampus, as I'm guessing your listeners know, for conscious declarative memory, it's ground zero for Alzheimer's damage. It's ground zero for a lot of types of damage with dementias. And memory problems then, and that's pretty disabling. What I spent decades and decades was studying what stress hormones do to the hippocampus. And 30 years of work can be summarized as not good things. Like the hippocampus doesn't work as well, connections shrivel up, neurons are more likely to die, you don't make new neurons as readily, and stress impacting learning and memory. And my lab sticking genes into the hippocampus to make it more stress resistant. And memory's a pretty important thing. By my age, I'm beginning to appreciate just how important memory is as it teeters more and more. And the hippocampus is a beautiful structure, and it does totally cool stuff. And I love looking at the hippocampus. It's like a stained brain, and it's aesthetically pleasing. So I just spent decades and decades on the hippocampus before kind of deciding the prefrontal cortex is much more interesting. Prefrontal cortex, most recently evolved part of the brain. We've got more of it than any other species. It's the last part of our brain to fully mature, not until we're like a quarter century old. What does the prefrontal cortex do? Self-control, gratification, postponement, impulse control. It makes you do the right thing when it's the harder thing to do. And all things considered, much more of the world's interesting, tragic, unexpected moments come from people doing dumbass, impulsive things because at some juncture their prefrontal cortex doesn't work very well, more frequently than their hippocampus doesn't come up with the name of this person they're at the party with, or I should know it, this is my third cousin, oh my God, faux pas. Memory's cool. Self-control, that's really what humans are about in lots of ways, and failures of self-control. So prefrontal cortex, very cool, but what the hell? Hippocampus is nice also.
So can you talk to us about neurogenesis in the hippocampus? When I was in high school, we were taught a lot of wrong things. I mean, that's the standard in science, right? You're taught what we think is correct now. It's often incorrect. We were taught that you can't grow new brain cells. And that's not true in particular in the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, and then also in the olfactory center, especially in rats and in pregnant women. I thought that was really, really interesting as well. Can you talk to us about neurogenesis?
Well, back when you were in high school, or if you went to high school like 10,000 years ago, that's what they would have taught you about the brain. After birth, you got all the neurons you're ever going to have. All you're going to do is lose them now from like imprudent things like drinking. You don't make new neurons. And in the 70s, 80s, this guy named Joseph Altman began to find evidence for it. He was at MIT at the time, that the hippocampus actually made new neurons, some very fancy techniques that he pioneered. Nobody believed him. He lost his job at MIT. He spent the rest of his career at Purdue, and it took about 30 years for the field to catch up with some then new techniques and show, oh my God, the guy was right. Adult brains do make new neurons, predominantly, as you said, in the hippocampus, in response to learning, to stimulation, to exercise, to estrogen. And you decrease neurogenesis in the hippocampus in response to stress, alcohol, brain inflammation. Whoa, that's totally amazing. You make new neurons. And this became the hottest topic in neuroscience around 2000, adult neurogenesis. What triggers it? Where are these neurons lurking there all those years beforehand? In what form? Do they know what they're doing when these new neurons are born? Do they integrate into circuits? What are they good for? And one of the things people have figured out is that the new neurons are good for what's called pattern separation. Okay, you've learned there's these boxy animals that have little tail things and heads that come out the front, and they sort of stumble around, and like, I don't know, they're turtle things, whatever. And then you learn, no, there's turtles and tortoises. There's a difference between them. That's where you got a couple of new neurons that day in your hippocampus, pattern separation.
That distinction. So I was at the zoo. There's this little kid who pointed everything that had four legs. There's a horsey, a zebra,
Exactly.
zebra, horsey, llama, horsey.
Yeah. That day we learned there's porpoises and dolphins. There's, I don't know, two actors are actually two different people instead of the same one. That seems to be what the new neurons are for. Right around the time, you take after the introductory course when they taught you X, then at the next level, they say, well, it's X most of the time, and here's when Y occurs instead. That's what you need the new neurons for, to separate this pattern. So it's totally cool, totally amazing. What it also did was trigger like this whole giddy hysteria of a new neurology. We're going to figure out how to harness adult neurogenesis and defeat Alzheimer's. And people have been saying that for a quarter century, and it hasn't happened yet because, you do some neurogenesis, and there's good reasons to be skeptical that the human brain actually does less adult neurogenesis than in other species, like Alzheimer's, alcoholic dementia, major car accident, whatever. Adult neurogenesis will be a nice sort of bit of like rearranging the silverware on the Titanic at that point. But for everyday stuff, that was totally revolutionary. That's the most exciting thing in neuroscience in the last 50 years.
And so this neurogenesis is not just, it's both new neural connections, which is often termed neuroplasticity, and new actual neurons, in specifically in the hippocampus.
Yeah. There's this little pocket of what are called stem cells in the hippocampus. And there's another little pocket near the olfactory system, as you said. And that's where the stimulation, exercise, etc., signals come through. And these stem cells differentiate and form into neurons. And the neurons then migrate. And they've got the characteristics of like baby neurons. They don't really know what they're doing. They're like not very adept with their neurotransmitters yet, but they sort of stumble into some circuit that they get integrated into, and they get some manners and they get some skills, and they help with the subtleties of learning.
And so stress impairs neurogenesis.
Yep.
Stress, bad food, and alcohol, and I'm guessing poor sleep, all these things impair neurogenesis. And learning and exercise and a healthy diet, and then pattern distinction, understanding distinction between a turtle and a tortoise, or a llama and a zebra, these things increase neurogenesis.
Yep, exactly.
Fantastic. I learned from the work of Dr. Elizabeth Gould. I'm guessing, I think this is still true, that every mammal has adult neurogenesis except bats for some reason. They're one of the species that doesn't have adult neurogenesis.
Yep, she's amazing. Liz Gould of Princeton. We trained in the same lab back some years before that, and she's one of the pioneers of adult neurogenesis. Totally amazing work amid there being weirdo exceptions. What's up with bats? Who knows?
Who was the person who found neurogenesis in the 70s?
A guy named Joseph Altman.
Joseph Altman. So that story reminds me of Semmelweis. I forget his first name. Semmelweis discovered basically that bacteria, viruses, small things we can't see, are causing disease, specifically in hospitals with women. If you remember the story, women were dying in hospitals who were giving childbirth, much more so compared to home births. And they said, what the heck's going on? And he said, it's because the doctors are coming straight from the morgue, touching dead bodies to touching the women. And he thinks there's transmitting something. So he found that if the doctors, I think he was head of the hospital, the doctors would just rinse their hands in basically bleach water. This stopped the problem. And it worked. But they didn't like his explanation. And so he was a master scientist, but not, I guess, a master influencer. He didn't understand, Robert Greene's, rules of power and how to influence people. And so they just said, we don't like what you're teaching because it's not what we know. And so they got him thrown out of his job, I think. And I think he ended his life in an insane asylum. And he was correct. And then Joseph Lister comes along, much more able to communicate ideas effectively. And they're like, oh, Lister, yeah, killing bacteria. Good idea. Let's go with that.
Let's name mouthwashes for him. Whereas Semmelweis, if Semmelweis only had a good TikTok angle, he could have done, shoot the messenger. Altman, a number of people, me included, nominated him for a Nobel Prize year after year. And he never got it. And towards the end of his life, he'd be interviewed. He was celebrated by them. How does it feel that people finally believe you? Was it frustrating not being believed? Do you think you get a Nobel Prize? And he's very philosophical. He said, look, I escaped a concentration camp. None of this stuff matters at this point. Who cares? But it's kind of nice that other people agreed, but very, very shoot the messenger kind of scenario, exactly as you say.
Well, bless him. I know we're short on time. I wanted to ask you about policy. When I first read your book, Behave, gosh, this would have been at least 5 years ago. I was struck by the fact that so many people on death row, so many criminals had some sort of traumatic brain injury. And if we look over history, so many times people will get an illness or a traumatic brain injury, it'll affect them. So Michael Eisner was a brilliant CEO at Disney. He had quadruple bypass surgery, never the same. Not an effective CEO. We see this, Emperor Caligula, 7 months into his reign, he was highly effective, got super duper sick, and then he went just down crazy train. Like that's when the crazy stuff happened. So illnesses can affect us, traumatic brain injury can affect us. And some of these, I want to call them poor people. So many poor souls, poor humans have had difficult upbringings, and they've been hit in the head somehow or something like that. And then they end up being criminals. Really, it's outside of their control. And when I read that, I felt horrible. And I said, what's the answer? What policy can we input to help with this? I was so upset by that being by our current reality that these poor people are experiencing head injury and then become criminals. So first of all, if I missed any gaps, please fill those in. And then I'd love to hear your policy recommendations. What can we do in society? And then if we have time, I'd like to hear what your recommendations are for parents for raising healthy children.
Well, the people who think about this, and of course, once you look at people who turn into serial murderers after a head injury, that's sort of your entree to, whoa, we're kind of biological machines, all of us. That's just an example that's very easy to appreciate. When you look at that, oh my God, you stop believing in free will, you're just going to let murderers run around on the streets. Of course not. You got to protect society from dangerous individuals. If a car's brakes stop working, you don't leave it out on the street. It's dangerous. It will kill people. You stick it in a garage. But you don't go in every day with a sledgehammer and bash the hood as punishment for it having bad brakes. It's not its fault. You don't preach to it about its rotten carburetor soul or something. It's just a broken machine, and you protect society from it. And in the same way, people who think about this use quarantine models. If you can't fix the dangerous individual, you quarantine them. Quarantine, as in do what's needed to keep them from being dangerous, and not 1 inch more, and not 1 inch more out of moralizing retribution. And don't preach to them about their soul. Oh my God, that sounds so crazy. That sounds like unworkable. We do it all the time. You got a 5-year-old kid and your kid is sneezing, and at kindergarten, they've got that rule posted up. Please, if your child has a nose cold, keep them home from school so you don't get everybody else sick. Your child is dangerous. Your child is a danger to society through no fault of their own. You quarantine them. You keep them home until they stop sneezing. You don't take their toys away. You don't tell them that, like, God is wreaking his vengeance on you and making you sneezy with. And we know in a society how to subtract out responsibility and still protect society from dangerous circumstances. And not only has the roof not fallen in, it's very good that we don't preach to cars or sneezy 5-year-olds. And all we need to do is just extend that more and more. We figured out epilepsy is not because you're in bed with Satan. It's like a potassium channel screw up in your hippocampus. We figured out that schizophrenia is a neurogenetic disorder. It's not because your mother secretly hated you. And in each one of these, we protect people. We get better at treating them. We get better at curing them. And we don't tell them that it's their damn fault, because it's not.
So the idea is, number one, view criminals as broken machines, not as evil people. Number two, quarantine them like we do with sick children. And then number three, it's not their fault. And so don't say it's your fault. What else can we do? So if someone's convicted of a serious crime, is the right response, do we automatically do a scan of their brain to see if there is a problem, and then try to address that?
Well, you would assume, just because things like brain scans are relatively new, they are crude as hell. They're flashy. They're exciting. They can tell you if somebody's lost a big chunk of their brain or if there's a massive tumor there. They're not subtle. Most of the time, you're not going to find out what's wrong with this person's brain. But given that we are social primates, if this is someone who's gone about very intentionally, horribly, remorselessly damaging other humans, you don't need a brain scanner to find out what exactly the problem is. This is not a normal brain. This is one version of a broken machine. And you got to protect society from them. In the same way, you look at somebody who's an amazing CEO, and all they are is a car that has extra pistons or who knows what, and don't make them feel more morally worthy than everyone else. All we are is the outcome of biological environmental luck. And if that depresses you, if that bums you out, that maybe you didn't deserve your great prestigious university degree or salary, whatever, all that means is you're one of the lucky ones. You're one of the ones who has a lot to lose if people decide you just lucked out, you and your biological machine. For people out there who are treated worse than average for reasons they had nothing to do with, a lack of free will is wonderfully freeing. It's liberating. You had nothing. You were screwed by the time you were a third trimester fetus kind of thing. That's great news.
That's fascinating. So I live a very blessed life, and I grew up with every privilege. I went to the very best schools. I had loving parents, still do. They're still alive, thank you God. And I'm in great health, and I get to do what I love. My parents, the only thing they would say is, "Why didn't you do it sooner?" My success kicked in later in life than I would have expected. But I thoroughly agree that my upbringing and background has been tremendously helpful in allowing me to do the things that I want to do, and I feel very grateful for that. And so you mentioned, babies are screwed in their third trimester sometimes. And it really upsets me, for example, the water fluoridation. When I was in graduate school at the University of Texas, we would testify at city government talking about the data on fluoride and how it can cross the blood-brain barrier, and the data in China and large meta-analyses showing children who grow up in higher communities with higher water fluoridation have lower IQ. Now it's just a couple points, but it was significant and it was reliable. And so, children who are born drinking tap water with a low quality diet next to the highway with bad air, oh my gosh, these poor children, how are they going to compete in this world? So I don't have children yet, but I would like to. And my desire is to raise the healthiest humans that I can, and to give them every opportunity as far as their health and their brain development. What are your suggestions as far as setting young humans up for success, biologically speaking?
Oh, I don't know, just the usual sort of fatuous list of stability and confidence and challenges that are just the right amount of challenging, so you don't teach them to be helpless, and challenges that are not too easy, so you don't teach them to be jaded or bored. Lots of clean oxygen now and then. That's a good thing for the brain. In terms of this lack of free will business, what I always think about is the statement, somebody does something nice for you and you say, tell your mother she did a good job. In other words, I'm not praising, you lucked out with the right mother. Train kids so that, in effect, when someone winds up doing something nice for you, instead of you saying, wow, I am so grateful to you for being kind or generous or whatever, you say, wow, I'm so grateful that you happen to turn out to be that sort of person who happened to be in this circumstance to help me. And if you say stuff like that enough, the next time someone says to you, oh, you're so wonderful that you're smart, and like maybe by then you'll think, nah, I had nothing to do with it. I'm just grateful. It turned out I had a lot of luck with this. So I'm not any more deserving than anyone else, and go make good use of the stuff that I lucked out with randomly.
I love the idea of thanking the parents. Thank your parents. They did a great job. I often try to say that to people when I meet their parents. I say, listen, you did a great job. You've raised a wonderful son or daughter. I'm so appreciative of them. So thank you for whatever you did.
And right there shows that you're skeptical about free will. So good for you.
Well, I guess I'm now partially on the team. Dr. Sapolsky, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. I so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join the show. This has just been wonderful.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Total fun. So take care.
I hope you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Robert Sapolsky. Please subscribe to us and follow us on YouTube. You can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and you can leave us a review there. And then please leave a comment below on YouTube, and I'd love to see any questions that you have, and also if you have recommendations for future guests. I love you. God bless you.